This is the Senate Education Committee, and I think we have a quorum, so please, let's call the roll.
Blue.
Here.
Huff. Block. Hancock. Leyva. Leyva here. Mendoza. Pan. Here. Pan here. Vidak. Vidak here.
Okay. We have
Five.
We have five. We have a quorum. Before we begin hearing just a couple of bills, I'd like to begin this hearing with a short tribute to John Mockler, who was a friend and a mentor to many. I know Dr. Pan said this on the Senate floor, and John passed on March 3rd. And he spent most of his career working on education policy and served in many capacities, including an education consultant to the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, education advisor to Speaker Willie Brown, executive director to the State Board of Education, secretary for education under Governor Davis, an education advisor extraordinaire, and a partner in a well-respected consulting firm. John is known as the father of Proposition 98, which established a minimum funding guarantee for public schools. John was one of the few people in Sacramento who fully understood the intricacies of Prop 98. And K-12 schools, community colleges, and countless students have benefited from the results of John's intellect and hard work. So John will always be remembered for his wit, irreverence, and dedication to his family, friends, and students of California. And John will be missed by many, and his legacy will certainly live on. So with that, let's begin the Senate Education Committee. Let me say that Senator Fuller has pulled item 3, SB 121. We'll hear only two bills, SB 1, SB 111 by Senator Fuller, and number 2, SB 118 by myself. So Senator Fuller, please join us with your witnesses.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you on this rainy day for being here in a timely manner so that we can all get started. And I know it was a battle. I talked to the elevator guy and said he was on the freeway for an extra hour this morning. So anyway.
Wow.
Thank you for this. Thank you for this opportunity to present SB 111. This bill will assist 11 public schools on or near military installations throughout California who have been qualified for Department of Defense school construction grant by helping fund their 20% match. And I'll talk to you in just a moment about why they cannot go through the traditional process. And I have brought some of the school superintendents and the OE expert that came from DC for the DOE funding. In 2010, the Department of Defense assessed the condition of 160 public schools across the United States on a military basis. The schools were then ranked with the most seriously deficient schools at the top. These were schools that had emergency repair issues, roofs, electrical, plumbing, all the things that you would expect most schools in California would have taken care of. Between 2011 and 2013, Congress provided the Office of Economic Adjustment $770 million in funding to address these repairs, renovations, and construction needs of the schools on the list. Unfortunately for California, we have 28 public schools on this list, more than any other state. And it's because of the way our funding works that has put us in this position. Of those 28 public schools are currently eligible to receive roughly $240 million to repair and renovate their facilities. However, time is running out. Other states are getting the money. And as you will hear today, they will be dropping schools that do not apply. In order to access this federal grant, schools eligible are required to provide a 20% match of the estimated cost. Due to the fiscal challenges, these schools need assistance with their 20% match before they may begin their construction. The military installations these schools are located near do not generate property tax revenues for the local school districts. So, for example, if you think of, I have 5 bases out in the desert, only a couple of them qualify for this, but the ones that do are miles and miles and miles of desert surrounding an air base and miles and miles and miles of desert surrounding a test station, and there's no buildings on them, and they're federal property. They do not generate property tax. So even if the school district wanted to tax their people, there's nothing to tax. And in one case, one of my schools actually did tax a very small town, if you've never heard of it, Ridgecrest. It's because it's very small. And we're able to get the folks to vote a very large tax on the few houses that were in the area. And that was just before the recession. And when our economy fell, everything went into recession and the property values dropped so greatly on those few houses that they can't fund the bond. So they're in a unique position because now they can't go forward and they can't go back. So these are children, many of color, because that's who volunteers to serve on our military bases, that are highly transient, and many of them come from really good school districts in other states. And so they know when they get there what the difference is if they can't get advanced courses because they've been in schools in other states that have those. Now today, we're not talking about putting advanced courses in. We're just talking about making the facilities better so they're not falling in with emergency repair problems. Today, I have with me the Office of Economic Adjustment Director, Patrick O'Brien. Patrick, gonna wave. Thank you, so they know. And Office of Economic Adjustment Community Investment Program Manager, Nia Hope. Nia? To answer any questions you may have related to the Department of Defense Grant Program, which is called OEA. We also have the OEA Western Regional Office Director, Gary Kuwaba. I'm going to get it right yet. And Superintendent Candace Singh is Candace, no, she's on her way with Fallbrook Unified Elementary School. Most of these schools are not in my district, by the way. Superintendent Ernie Bell, I'm going to give a little wave back there, from Sierra Sands Unified District. Superintendent Kate Rin Galak from Travis Unified School District. Superintendent Tom Addington from Central Union School District. Chief Business Officer Trevor Walker from Muroc Unified School District. These are some of the schools that are seeking the assistance. At this time, if there's any questions, or if I could let one or two of my
Sure.
people
Why don't you
speak.
have in support?
Great. Okay, let's start with Gary. If you or Nia would like to talk about, or Patrick would like to talk, or maybe together, about the reason why this is so urgent is because these funds are about to disappear. And just very quickly, Congressman now, Alan Lowenthal, sent a letter of support because he has tracked this issue for a number of years. And I don't think it got on your summary, we just got it.
Certainly, if I may.
Please.
Madam Chair Liu, Vice Chair Huff, and members of this committee, I'm honored to testify before you, and I will speak on behalf of the Office of Economic Adjustment today about this program called the Public Schools on Military Installations. It is managed by the Office of Economic Adjustment. It is under the Secretary of Defense. I work for the Secretary of Defense. My staff that is represented here, that Senator Fuller introduced to you, has been working pretty much nonstop with the school districts that she mentioned since 2010 coming forward. So we've been working with the school districts that are affected by this program really for the last 5 years. In April 2010, and I guess before I begin, I have a written statement that I would like for you to accept for your formal record of this hearing. In April 2010, then Secretary Robert Gates hosted a town hall for the troops and their families stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas. We were in the midst of excessive deployments, where we were sending folks off to the war on terror. And you know where those locations are because they continue today. Excessive deployments and a military spouse spoke out about the condition of public education facilities at Fort Riley and the resulting stress of having their children educated in those facilities. Basically at Fort Riley, we had schools where kids were going into closets for classrooms. They were taking tests in closets, leaking roofs. We had another situation, quite frankly, where the school actually was located on top of a sewer line. The sewer line was leaking. So it actually smelled like a treatment facility. So the kids on a daily basis were going into this facility and it was driving the parents nuts. All right, so it didn't take long actually to recognize this military spouse could have been speaking on behalf of any of the thousands of families with children attending these public schools at any of our domestic facilities. The reaction was immediate. The secretary came back, and we all recognize that any warfighter who routinely places his or her life on the line for this nation, coupled with the immense sacrifices his or her family already endures through deployments and protecting this nation, should not be burdened further by the conditions and/or capacities of on-base public schools. Within 18 months, the department not only had gone out and ranked all 160 schools that are publicly owned on our military bases, but we had also obtained authorization and appropriations from Congress. Now, everybody knows there's a lot of dysfunction in Washington, all right? There was no dysfunction over what we ought to be doing to take care of the kids of these military soldiers. And there was no us versus them. Everybody was supportive of this program. In addition to that, we ended up coming up with a program construct, which I'm now going to walk you through. The program construct basically is that we work only with local school districts operating a public school on the priority list that was developed after assessing these 160 schools. And it's by invitation only. Until now, our priority has been the top schools on that list get treated by this money. We also support activities to construct, renovate, repair, or expand elementary and secondary public schools on military installations, whatever is necessary to correct the reasons why that school is on this list. We are building new schools. We are renovating schools. We are expanding schools. Whatever is needed to bring these schools up to being an adequate environment for the kids that attend those schools. We ensure funds do not supplant funds previously committed to or available for the project. And last, a major tenet of this program is there needs to be a match, and not less than 20% of the total project cost is expected to be provided by the local school district. Now, I have some discretion as the director of the Office of Economic Adjustment to waive a portion of this match, basically whenever we encounter a situation where a school district does not have the ability to pay. I might add, however, that to date, I have never waived more than 4.5% of that match requirement. Following enactment of our fiscal year 15 appropriations, this program is being revised or modified so that now the 20% match is to be provided by either the local school district or, importantly, the state in which the school is located. And secondly, otherwise eligible schools on the priority list now may be passed over if neither the local school district nor the state provides the required match. Once passed over, a local school district may subsequently reapply. However, our ability to approve that application will be subject to availability of any remaining funds. And let me just put that in layman's terms. We fence off money to take care of the worst schools on this list. We're going to get to a point where if a school cannot come up with match, we're going to be confronted with, do we wait, do we waive, or do we go on to the next school on that list? Once we go on to the next school on that list, if that money becomes obligated to take care of that lower rated school or ranked school, there will not be funds available to take care of the higher rated or ranked schools. And I want to stress that was intentional. Congress's express affirmation of the 20% match requirement recognizes that to date, local school districts in combination with their respective states have provided at least 15.5% in match, and most have provided the full amount. By affirming the match requirement for this program, Congress has signaled its understanding that to permit a waiver without compelling reasons is unfair to those local school districts that have met or are prepared to meet all or most of the matching requirement, and to do so denies to schools further down the priority list the assistance they need to properly serve their student populations. The program currently consists of $901 million. If you look technically at the appropriations, there was more money appropriated, but we had a sequester. And while the sequester was turned off in FY fiscal year 14 and 15, in fiscal year 13, the sequester did hit. There was a lot of talk about it. And the cost of that sequester was we lost 10% of the available funds. So we lost about 44 million of those available monies as a result of the sequester. That 44 million basically would have been the equivalent of a school project. So a school would have fallen off the list with the loss of that money. All right. We have obligated to date 437 million of this amount for projects across 22 schools. 5 of these schools have now had projects completed and are open. Educating students, that includes a new school at Fort Riley, where I attended actually a grand opening just this past fall. And the program is making an impact in the lives of the military, their dependents, and is making a dent, if you will, in the problems that these local school districts have in trying to provide adequate facilities and accommodations for students. There are other special needs that come along with with the military students as well. And these facilities, as they're being updated, takes that into account. So it really is a decent, holistic environment for the military students. I want to add that with the funds obligated to date, we currently have 464 million remaining that will be available until we spend it, which basically means that it's subject to another potential reduction if I don't obligate it. And there is a sequester coming if the Congress cannot turn off the Budget Act. And so we would expect that if funds remain available and the sequester hits in FY16 as currently anticipated, we will lose some of that money. I want to now turn our focus on the specific California schools. As I said, we've been working with them for the better part of 5 years. I want to add some of them have been able to come up with match. And it probably correlates to common sense. If they're in more urban areas, if they have a bigger tax base, Senator Fuller talked about some of the demographics for some of these areas, you can triangulate yourselves. If you have a tax base that goes outside the fence of the military installation, you might be able to basically backstop a bond issue. You might be able to put a bond issue to the electorate's vote. California has some unique situations with the placement of their schools. Secondly, California also has a protracted state architect review process that has added significant time to the review of some of these projects. It's been a mixed blessing, quite frankly. So these schools with their projects now have been postponed because of the state architect review process. That has also postponed us having to make a final determination of whether we can fund some of these projects without adequate match attached to them. Now, I want to also add, over half of these locations lack the required 20% match, and we've ended up split funding them. And so by split funding them, we have gone ahead and we provide funds so they can actually go out, plan and design projects to bring their facilities up to a standard. That allows them to work with the state architect's process. It allows them to actually move the project ahead so they aren't really losing time, if you will, in the building of the project. But we're also getting to the point now where the architect review process is going to come to a conclusion, and we're going to have to start making some final decisions on what we're going to do about the funding of the actual construction, renovation, or the project these school districts want to undertake to respond to these deficiencies. So the total estimated project needs, as Senator Fuller mentioned, is basically estimated to be $302 million. That changes a little bit because some of these school districts, as you would encounter on any other project, when they get into the project, they start digging and they find things or something else happens. So there's little nuances that might come about that might change some of these estimates, but $302 million is basically the ballpark figure we're working with. We would anticipate of that $302 million, $241 million would come from my office. That would remain or leave a balance of $61 million for local match on behalf of all of these school districts. Again, these projects have to respond to the deficiencies that were the basis for the ranking. To assist this committee with understanding the needs at each of these 11 schools, I also would like for the record to be added the actual DoD assessment of each school. And that assessment was undertaken by the Defense Education Activity. It's an organization separate and distinct from mine, but it was the basis on which all 160 schools were evaluated. They came up with a baseline that was across the country so that all schools could be measured against that baseline. And quite frankly, the Secretary of Defense accepted that comparison as a basis for where this money would be prioritized in its expenditures. Now, I previously delivered testimony before the State Allocation Board in April 2012, where the local inability to fund this match was identified as a burden for some local school districts. Last year, this committee considered a similar request to assist local school districts. This year, I'm coming before you asking the state of California to assist those local school districts that are unable to provide the match requirement themselves. In the absence of the match, I want you to all understand now, this is not what has been communicated previously, but is now going to be the case, that we may skip eligible California schools on the priority list and consider the next school on the priority list for funding. Those next schools are located in other states and at other installations. It's a decision we're going to have to make, and quite frankly, there is grave concern that if we issue a 100% waiver for any particular school district, that we're going to start stepping into what we call the moral hazard. And I can address that further if you would like, but the intent of my being here today is to see if there's something we can do with the state of California to assist these school districts and avoid quite frankly, a spiraling that we don't want to see, which is we're going to skip over some of these schools. In closing, I want to express our appreciation to the California Department of Education, especially former School Facilities Director Kathleen Moore, and most recently Interim Director Fred Yeager. I have to say that throughout this process, they have also been working with each of these school districts in tandem with my staff. We are very community-based when we go out to do something, and we don't believe you can be effective without having a holistic approach with the state involved. So I want to thank them for their support and efforts to assist these efforts to date. And this concludes my formal statement. And with Senator Fuller, I look forward to addressing any questions you may have on this.
Thank you very much. You know, Senator Fuller, Senator Hancock, and myself, we all sit on the State Application Board. Kathleen Moore is also a member of the board, et cetera. You've been here for 5 years trying to work out an amenable resolution to this issue with the local school districts. And you're telling me that none of the 6 school districts that we're talking about that have these 11 schools they cannot meet the match.
What I'm telling you is that there are 2 or 3 schools where we believe the school districts will be able to come up with match.
San Diego, for instance.
San Diego.
Correct.
I'm hesitant to speak authoritatively for all those school districts because even today where we might have a match that's in place, as I said, once they start turning dirt, they're finding things. So we have a project, for instance, out at China Lake, where on the face of it, it looks like they can come up with the match requirement, but they've encountered some issues in the construction activity which will add significant costs to their project. And we will entertain an increase in those costs, but it will have to come along with an increase in match.
Huh. Well, you know, okay, so I mean, for us at the state level, you know what our issue is here. I mean, we have historically funded facilities through an allocation from bonds. And some of your districts that you're talking about are on that bond list, but no money's been attached to their projects, et cetera, as I understand it. And so you're asking us to, for another $61 million out of general fund dollars that this committee is not able to do because we're not a finance committee, but we're a policy committee. So the question for us is whether or not we open that door to fund facilities out of general fund as opposed to bond dollars. It's one of the issues.
May I reply to that?
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
When earlier, a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans carried this bill a number of years ago, and I think you remember it came before the policy committee, and it was led by a Democrat, and our our hope was to get it out of the state allocation board, and that was when the state allocation board actually had some money. Unfortunately, that was a really tight time, and it did not pass. So I brought it back last year. I got it, and it was to get money, to get priority out of the state allocation board, because the way the rules read in the state allocation board, it's almost impossible for many of these schools to jump through the hoops, and I'll explain that in a moment why. But I brought that bill forward, and it was wonderful. Everybody voted for it. We got it all the way over to the very last Appropriations Committee. And the last night in the Assembly, the Appropriations Committee was just too far down on the list. But at that time, there wasn't as much of an urgency, because at that point, the money was pretty much California's for California's taking, as long as we were so high up on the list, which we were, unfortunately, because our schools were so bad and in such bad shape. So I'm bringing it back now, and I think there's precedent for taking it, and let me read you why there's precedent. But, you know, we have used $274 million in 2015-16 for emergency repairs. That was because of legislation enacted in 2004, which was the Williams settlement. In the Williams settlement, $274 million was set aside out of the general fund for emergency repairs. Funding is also provided as grants, such as $800 million has been dispersed for this purpose. But the difference is not construction, but emergency repairs. SAB, State Allocation Board, focuses more on new construction and modernization. And modernization means that you can bring something up to ADA standards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if your roof falls in, that you can fix your roof. So these are a little bit different kinds of repairs that have come through SAB. And so far, $527 million in Prop 98 funds have been provided to low-performing schools for facility repairs, with no local match requirement. So actually there are programs that have given money out of either Prop 98 or the general fund for emergency repairs. You know, I wouldn't have went there to begin with, but we've exhausted every remedy to go through the SAB, and I sit on the SAB. And part of the reason that there's been a problem with the SAB is because at first, the schools had no money to pass bonds, so they also had no money to do facilities planning, plus they had no opportunity to get anything done if they paid for a design plan. In other words, if you don't have any money, you don't go to the state architect and you don't raise, you know, you don't do a plan and say, here's the plan. But DOD fixed that, because they gave these planning grants that they were talking about, so that those schools that were in that position could do the architectural plans and review that they needed to do. Unfortunately, SAB closed its doors, and you couldn't apply when most of these schools had finished that planning and received the grant. So there's like 3 levels of things that happen to the schools along the way. But the first is that our system was not constructed for this contingency. The second is that once people made adjustments, especially DOD, we have to realize they've done really a lot to make this work on their side. Our timelines ran out, and or our bond money ran out. So now this is the place that we are. I had 2 bills, but I was given to understand that the committee preferred I only bring one forward. The reason I had 2 bills was because the other was the old SAB funding mechanism again. So I'm here at your wishes, but I'm here as a school superintendent. Let me tell you just a minute. I know you have many other things to do, but you know me, I don't generally talk a lot, and I'm not somebody who does much grandstanding, but the truth here is that how I found out about this was when I was a school superintendent. The poor little superintendent next door to me had this problem. And she was new, and she thought as an old superintendent I could fix her problem. So she came to me and she said, come visit my 2 schools. One's in a school, Boron, California. If you've never heard of that, it's because it's really, really small. One was in Boron, and one was on Edwards Air Force Base. And I went to Boron, and I saw they have, like, I don't know, their population is, I mean, at a stretch, 2,000 at a stretch. And it's in the middle of the desert. There's nothing around it. There's not even any trees. And that was where they taxed for that half of the school district. Then I went to Edwards, which was the other half of their school district, and it's nothing but federal land. There's nothing but sagebrush. There was nothing to tax. So they took me through school, and truly, it just hurt a superintendent's heart and any parent's heart that would see it, because the disrepair was huge, but they had no way to fix it. They can't go anywhere else. The bus ride to Lancaster is like, by bus, it's like 3 hours by the time you go pick kids up. Facilities in Boron are too small. So I'm not even sure that this bill will completely help them today, but they're one of the ones on the list, and that's why I'm here today, is that shame on us. I know everyone's doing their job. I know the analysts did a great job, and I appreciate it. I know the analysts last year did a great job, and I appreciate it. But here we are. These kids in this school are going to be deprived of the minimal emergency repair facilities unless you keep this bill moving and work with me at this time. And the other thing that's sort of shame on us is that ultimately, we've been here before the legislature, not just me, but others have led this 3 times. And this is where it lives or dies. And all the superintendents, if you'd stand up, that are with me today from the bases, have this problem, and there are many more. And if you look in your analysis, you'll see the others. They're from all over the state. Finally, as a Republican, I can't stand to leave $270 million on the federal table, because eventually, folks, we're going to have to pay for this whole thing ourselves. I mean, you can't have schools just with roofs collapsing. California's going to have to pay for it. So we're going to get to pay for it all. So I'm just here to say, let's try to do something prudent together. And I know all of you are people who care about it. And your vote is just about policy today. Let the fiscal committee worry about this. Your vote is policy. You're not opening the door to anything. All you're doing is saying, is it good policy for these kids to be in a school with not enough emergency repairs that the nation has pointed out that they're the worst in the nation, or not? Thank you.